Milk chocolate didn't just appear on a shelf one day, it took a Swiss chocolatier named Daniel Peter 8 full years of frustration to crack the formula. The problem was chemistry. Cocoa butter is hydrophobic, which means introducing any water-containing milk caused the whole thing to seize and spoil. Peter's neighbor in Vevey happened to be Henri Nestlé, who'd built a business processing condensed milk for infants, and that removed water product was exactly what Peter needed. By 1875, the pairing worked, and the world got its first shelf-stable milk chocolate bar. The result is that smooth, meltingly familiar sweetness most people mean when they say chocolate, a balanced emulsion of cocoa solids and caramelized dairy that coats the tongue without any bitterness. Its durability is what made it militarily strategic. During World War II, the U.S. Army specifically included it in D rations, alongside ammunition and medical supplies, valued for caloric density and stability across extreme temperatures. Today, milk chocolate commands roughly 70% of the entire global chocolate market. The most jaw-dropping proof of its shelf life? A bar from Captain Scott's 1913 Antarctic expedition sold at auction for nearly $700, perfectly preserved by sub-zero conditions, with the original formula still intact. Dark chocolate has a lineage going back to around 1900 BC, making it the oldest food on this list by a significant margin. The Olmecs of southeastern Mexico were the first to ferment and grind cacao beans. Though what they produced bore no resemblance to a chocolate bar, it was a bitter, chili-spiked drink consumed in rituals, burials, and war preparations. The Mayans later turned cacao beans into literal currency. A turkey cost 100 beans, a tamale cost 1, and archaeologists have found counterfeit clay beans, the ancient world's version of counterfeiting cash. Modern high-quality dark chocolate, 70% cocoa and above, still relies on that original fermentation process, where freshly harvested beans are left to cure under banana leaves for days, developing the flavor precursors that roasting later unlocks. Unlike any other variety, it contains theobromine, a mild stimulant that dilates blood vessels and sharpens focus without the jittery crash of caffeine. Connoisseurs treat single-origin bars the way sommeliers treat wine, hunting for terroir notes from volcanic soils in Ecuador or Madagascar. The rarest end of the market is genuinely extreme. Toac chocolate, made from near-extinct Nacional cacao in Ecuador and aged 18 months in 50-year-old French cognac casks, has sold for $345 a bar, with only 200 bars in existence. White chocolate was born in 1930s Switzerland, not as a creative vision, but as a logistics problem. When Nestlé was producing cocoa powder at scale, the process extracted enormous quantities of cocoa butter as a byproduct, and someone needed to figure out what to do with the surplus. The answer was to blend it with milk solids and sugar, no cocoa solids at all, which is why white chocolate is technically not chocolate in any botanical sense, just a very particular arrangement of fat, dairy, and sweetness. That lipid-heavy composition gives it an unusually low melting point and a distinctly creamy, almost clotted cream texture on the tongue. Legally, both the EU and the US require a minimum of 20% cocoa butter content for the label white chocolate to be used. Otherwise, it's just confectionery coating. Pastry chefs have fully embraced its neutrality because it carries almost no competing flavor of its own. It acts as a blank canvas for wasabi, saffron, yuzu, and lavender without those aromatics getting buried. The quality gap between artisanal and supermarket white chocolate is enormous. Premium makers use undeodorized cocoa butter that retains a faint natural cocoa ghost, while the mass-market version typically substitutes vegetable fat and heavy vanilla, and the two taste nothing alike. Ruby chocolate is the first genuinely new chocolate category to be recognized in over 80 years, unveiled by Barry Callebaut in September 2017 after more than a decade of development. The pink isn't a dye, a berry extract, or a food coloring. It comes entirely from specific cocoa beans grown in Ecuador, Brazil, and Ivory Coast that contain natural ruby pigments and a proprietary processing method that prevents those pigments from oxidizing into the usual brown. That process involves precise control of acidity, temperature, and fermentation duration, all kept as a trade secret, not a patent, which is why no competitor has been able to replicate it. The flavor profile is genuinely strange by chocolate standards. Tart, fresh, slightly yogurt-like, with no bitterness whatsoever, more reminiscent of raspberry coulis than anything from a cocoa bean. The color is photosensitive, meaning heat, moisture, or direct sunlight will cause it to fade toward beige, which creates real challenges for chocolatiers working with it in kitchens. From a niche launch in Shanghai, deliberately chosen for its social media culture, it expanded globally within 6 months and is now a standardized commercial category in confectionery. It remains the most technically demanding chocolate to produce at scale, which keeps its price well above the standard bar. Matcha chocolate originated in Japan and is essentially a technical negotiation between two very opinionated ingredients. Matcha powder is made from tencha leaves that are shade-grown for several weeks before harvest, a process that boosts both chlorophyll, producing the vivid green, and L-theanine, an amino acid that promotes calm focus. When stone ground and blended into white chocolate's cocoa butter base, the tea's natural astringency performs a useful chemical function. It cuts through the fat and sugar, preventing the cloying, one-note sweetness that makes standard white chocolate feel heavy. Japanese specialty shops treat matcha chocolate as a precision product, offering intensity scales that run from 1% tea content all the way past 20%, each giving a noticeably different bitterness to sweetness ratio. The particle size of the ground tea matters. If the matcha is too coarse relative to the chocolate's texture, the melt becomes slightly gritty, which is why serious manufacturers use the same stone grinding technique used in traditional tea ceremony preparation. At the high end, ceremonial-grade matcha, the kind used in formal tea ceremonies, is priced at several $100s per tin of raw powder, which pushes the finished chocolate bars into serious luxury territory. Beyond flavor, the L-theanine content gives matcha chocolate a quiet, functional claim that other varieties can't match. Blonde chocolate has an origin story that any chef would find both mortifying and vindicating. In 2006, Frédéric Baud, creative director at French luxury chocolatier Valrhona, was conducting a demonstration in Japan when he accidentally left white chocolate sitting in a bain-marie unattended for over 15 hours. When he came back to it, the chocolate had turned a deep amber color and smelled of toasted shortbread and caramelized milk, the result of the Maillard reaction slowly working through the milk solids and sugars. It still took Valrhona 8 more years of research to stabilize the formula and bring it to market as Dulce in 2012. The flavor is unlike any other chocolate, deeply savory sweet, with notes of roasted biscuit, browned butter, and a faint saltiness that lingers at the finish, a far cry from white chocolate's simple dairy sweetness. Production requires precise temperature control throughout. Too high and the sugar burns bitter. Too low and the Maillard reaction stalls, leaving the chocolate pale and underdeveloped. Since Dulce's commercial release, it has sparked an entire toasted white movement in craft chocolate, with makers worldwide experimenting with their own caramelized versions. For anyone who finds white chocolate too bland and dark chocolate too intense, blonde sits in an unusually satisfying middle ground. Raw chocolate is defined by a single, uncompromising rule. Nothing in the production process exceeds 42 degrees Celsius, 108 degrees Fahrenheit. Where conventional chocolate gets its signature deep, roasted flavor from high-heat processing, raw chocolate skips the roast entirely, cold-pressing the beans instead to preserve enzymes and heat-sensitive antioxidants like epicatechin. The flavor payoff is radically different, more vegetal, floral, and acidic, with a slightly granular texture because the cocoa butter hasn't been tempered at conventional temperatures and none of the caramelized chocolatey notes that roasting creates. Without the brittleness induced by roasting, separating the shell from the nib winnowing requires specialized equipment or labor-intensive hand peeling, which significantly drives up production costs. This keeps the category firmly in the artisanal niche, often marketed as a superfood rather than a confection. The audience for raw chocolate is specific: health-focused consumers and cacao purists who prioritize maximum nutrient density, specifically magnesium and flavanols, and are willing to accept a flavor profile that trades traditional roasted comfort for intense, unadulterated complexity. Vegan chocolate sounds straightforward, just remove the dairy, but the food science involved is surprisingly stubborn. Dark chocolate is naturally vegan, so the real technical challenge is creating a milk-style bar without cow's milk, which means replacing the fats that make conventional chocolate smooth, snappy, and slow-melting on the tongue. Plant fats behave differently from milk fats at a molecular level, and getting them to bind properly with cocoa butter requires high shear conching, essentially more aggressive mechanical mixing, alongside carefully chosen bases like oat flour, rice syrup, or tiger nut flour. Oat milk has become the dominant standard because the enzymatic breakdown of its starches produces a natural sweetness and a creamy viscosity that comes closer to dairy than almost anything else. The sustainability argument is concrete. Plant-based chocolate production generates a substantially lower carbon footprint and uses significantly less water than dairy-based equivalents, which is driving investment from major confectionery companies. Modern formulations have reached the point where the snap, when you break the bar, a textural benchmark that chocolate lovers use as a quality signal, and the melt profile are indistinguishable from a conventional milk bar in blind tests. The category has moved from niche health food to mainstream shelf presence in under a decade, which is fast by confectionery industry standards.